Here we are in Ives' studio, and there's just so much to see and talk about that we're never going to get to. So we thought we'd start with this picture that's under Jim's hand. When I was researching my Ives biography, there was a letter from a friend of his named Clifton Furness who had visited Ives. And he wrote, I have such a powerful memory of Brahms dancing on the piano and during my visit. And I assumed that he meant that Ives was playing Brahms. And in fact, if you look around this room, there's a picture of Brahms over there, there's a picture of Brahms over there, and there's a biography of Brahms over there.
Several books on Brahms.
Several.
Yeah.
And I got in here and realized that it was this picture of Brahms on the piano that was dancing. And that's what Furness was talking about.
Pounding at the piano would have caused us to dance.
So that's why it's important for a biographer to see a room like this.
You gotta be in this room. It's magical to be in this room for any of us because it represents so much of his life. There are the doors, the hat, the whole history of the family, his favorite booze, his hat. I mean, it's everywhere, and it's overwhelming stimulus to somebody that is as deep into Ives as you are, or that as my life has been. As you look around this room, there is everything in Charles Ives' life represented. The postering on the door, the father's cornet, the books that Ives did, music like these songbooks and the Concord in the room. It just overwhelms you with stimulus to be in this place. This is mind-boggling.
It really is. Let's list some of the things. There's a picture of Charles Ives' football team. There's a baseball team that I think he's on. A drawing of him and his roommate at Yale. There's a picture of Brahms, picture of Franck.
Two favorite composers.
A poster of the insurance company.
Yeah.
A Orchestra Symphonique de Paris program from 1932 where his music was played, I assume.
We have John Kirkpatrick's program from the premiere of the Concord in New York.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
A poster for a concert program of Ives' Celestial Country, the sort of Victorian cantata he wrote.
The 1902 critical moment where he gave up church music.
He was disgusted by what he's done. There's an article by his brother, Moss Ives, who was a judge.
As a judge and lawyer, yeah.
The Ark and the Dove. So, and these doors, Ives could open up into the house.
Directly to the dining room, yeah.
Yeah, play for people.
So they are a bulletin board of his whole musical life, and they are a metaphor for his mind and his music.
And his business life too. Again,
and business life.
Stuff from the insurance company all mixed into these things. In fact, there's a picture of a bunch of suits in the insurance company standing around the table.
He wrote one of his songs for some of their meetings in 1917.
Well, I think Flanders Field, maybe.
In Flanders Field, I think that was the one that got done there, yeah.
By the way, there's his hat sitting up, and people talked about his hat full of holes. There it is.
Yeah, his nephews were always horrified by the condition of his hat. Well, that would be later on, of course, because it was once a decent hat. He didn't buy it with holes.
Yeah, I'm sure.
They earned their place.
His library, which is full of the most amazing variety of things, his intellectual curiosity.
Philosophy, science, psychology.
Yeah.
Lots of things of music, the biographies that existed of Beethoven and Brahms, Mozart, everything.
Yeah.
He needed yours. He missed out on the better biographies.
Here's the original printing of the 114 songs.
People don't often, you never see it reproduced in green, but the very first way the songbook was done is in green buckram. And one song was missing, empty pages, you see them right there, for the song Grantchester, because he hadn't gotten the copyright for the lyrics yet and didn't want to wait. So he did a trial run of having 500 copies there, and then under that is the famous blue-bound version, which was a year later with Grantchester included and about 1,500 copies, which he was distributing for free.
And here's the
Copyright.
these were
free.
vanity printings. You know, he
Yeah.
paid money to have
That's
these
right.
engraved.
Sherman
Here's the Concord.
engraved the Concord Sonata for him.
And he just sent them out at random to everybody in the world. So there's a letter from John Philip Sousa who's saying, well, you certainly don't have traditional harmonic ideas that I grew up with. And
The original Concord.
imagine getting these things in the mail out of the blue. If you're a musician, you have no idea who Ives is. And they're completely incomprehensible music just to get them out of the blue like that.
For Sousa. It was very polite of him to even thank him.
Yeah, I know.
Others were immediately rude, and Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge, who was a big patroness of the arts, was offended. But Ives had asked for that because this book starts with the gnarliest piece.
Yes. It starts
Majority,
with majority, yeah.
also known as The Masses.
And
Could have started with Evening, which would have been a lovely opening. That's number 2 in the book.
yep, he started right in your face. Well, some of these got into the hands eventually of George Gershwin,
Right.
who became very interested. Gershwin was just fascinated by anything new in music.
Well, some of these songs had ragtime in them, and he was really impressed to see
Yeah.
artful treatment of ragtime. That excited him, and it was only, after, we don't know what year that was that he responded, but the book was 1922, and in 24, or am I right, for the Rhapsody in Blue? I mean,
That's a good-
almost immediately
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have Gershwin emboldened perhaps from Ives.
And he tried to get in touch with Ives,
Yeah, it was-
but Ives was in Europe at the time. That must have been the 30s, maybe.
Yeah. All right. Well, no, I think that memo was earlier, and Ives was just, the secretaries knew to stonewall
Yeah.
anybody, and they wrote down the response that Gershwin had to the book, that he was so impressed with the use of ragtime. And that's all. Ives never was actually in touch with Gershwin personally. In 2012, the Ives family needed to sell off the location on Umpqua Road in West Reading, Ives's summer home. And it was necessary to pack up everything. This had to be preserved one way or another. And it was through the offices of the American Academy of Arts and Letters that it was to be brought here. And it was seriously, bodily brought here. Every element that's in this room was pried carefully off the walls or brought up. These are built-in cabinets, but they were removed from the place so that we're recreating everything about it. The plastering of the walls, the windows, trim, and all is original. And key things like this piano brought in. The piano that Ives would have gotten, well, I don't know whether it was at the same time as the studio was a push out from the house. The house is at Umpqua was built in 1912 to 13. This studio was an extra room put on about 1920. So the piano was either bought in 1924, this spot, or it could have been in the living room of the house. And then when there was you had to have a piano in the house before this, so this was probably it. It's a great piano. Like any upright, it has a kind of boomy bass, but it's remarkably clear. And Don Berman has recently played some of the Concord Sonata, the Alcott's movement on it. Yeah. So it was all brought here and carefully recreated. When I look around, because I know the in situ character of the place, it's just so exact that it chills me. It makes my knees weak to walk in the room. In the corners of the room, there were pipes running upstairs for heating. Those aren't recreated. That's all. Everything else is incredibly
including
exact.
the floor. So
Incredibly exact.
again, all these things, Ives was somebody who was so much involved with the past. And so these are all memorials of the past.
Yeah.
There's him and his brother, there's his father's trumpet, his hat, his Over there, a picture of Yale. There is a picture, as best we can tell, of Harmony's father's Catholic priest friend from the Civil War.
Pretty inclusive, all of those
Yes.
distant things. And you know, his cane and the chair that he had at the piano. It's amazing. There are music stands here that go back, and
There's a picture of Emerson. There's a picture of his church that Ives worked at in New Jersey.
yes, right there, yeah. This one.
This was not narcissism. This was somebody who was so connected to the past, and the past of not only his
Yeah.
own past, but the past of his father, the Civil War, and the music of the 19th century that he grew up with.
Affection for all of that. Just
Right.
it's humanism. It's the love of people and their events, and love of his father, of course.
And family, yeah. Not only his family, but his wife's family. In fact, there's a church up there. Could that be the Asylum Hill Church that her father preached at? I don't
Inside
know.
it, I'll take a close look. Maybe very Gothic, so I'm not sure if that would be congregational.
No. It's what,
We're scholars
it's what
and
her
we're
father's
guessing.
friend Mark Twain called the Church of the Holy Speculators.
Yeah. Ives kept up with things. He kept buying newer books on these subjects that excited him: philosophy, science, acoustics, the Helmholtz, and the biographies of great musicians.
And his essays before a sonata are a compendium of his readings in philosophy and literature and things. There, he remembers them off the top of his head. He's not really interested in precise quotes
But
necessarily.
he's pretty good considering how he is doing those off the top of his head. They
Yeah.
don't miss a thing in the impact or the gist and key words. He remembers them well. Kind of writes like Emerson. It's all over the place.
Yeah.
I love how in the essays, you're in the middle of a paragraph and something stunning, lightning strikes. Incredible one sentence.
Yeah.
And I could be talking about Emerson or Ives, because they both do that.
Well, for example, in the essay on Emerson, he seems, in the guise of talking about Emerson and making some very good literary points about Emerson, he's really talking about the Emerson movement of the Concord Sonata. When he says Emerson does not retrace his footsteps, he's talking about the technique of the first movement of the Concord Sonata that doesn't repeat anything.
That's right. It's subtly parallel. He really engages every composer, every author that he works with in his design to have the overtures of the literary overtures, or just in the Concord, the four that are in there. He really engages them on their own grounds, and he changes his style to become the representative of that art. I think it's stunning. I mean, how selfless. Even to the point that Robert Browning is an off-putting work, because that's what he thought of the rigor and absoluteness of thought that Robert Browning put down. I think his language is really Emerson's language. The music that he wrote for Emerson is really the quintessential Ives language.
Well, because it is craggy and searching and exploratory and poetic.
Both sides,
and
yes.
yeah. So here's something that, as a biographer of various people and a thinker about music, that connects with Ives in so many ways. When we're taught music in music school, we're taught that developments in music, and especially modernism, are a matter of technique. Expansion of technique. The reality is that every musical revolution had to do with picturing something outside music. Beethoven's Eroica, which was originally about
romantic.
Napoleon.
Yeah.
The Rite of Spring, which is about a particular story, and the
pagan,
ballet.
yes.
Perrault Lunaire, which was a matter of Schoenberg saying, I want to express these very strange poems with an appropriate musical language. And meanwhile, I want to actually note he's doing a traditional thing called a melodrama, where you recite poetry to music, and he just said, I'm going to notate the poetry, the speaking exactly for a change. And Ives, whose innovations so much of the time came from trying to portray something outside music that changed and developing a musical language to talk about that. And there's no better example of that than Emerson in the Concord Sonata. So the great revolutions in music were not just a technical feat, they were technique at the service of trying to picture something or express something. And Ives is absolutely in tradition in that
Quintessential
respect.
romantic, and with
Yes.
the romanticism of the past, and yeah,
He really was a romantic composer. He just happened to be using a different
and a
language.
romantic performer
Yes.
with plastic time, speeding up and slowing down to create arches in the music, or to match the arches in the music with breathing time.
Yeah.
Rigidity in the 20th century came from a turnaround from perhaps mishandled excesses in music interpretation. Toscanini and on, and this, go back to the score and set a metronome. But that's not Ives, actually.
Well, somebody met Ives, and as I remember it, he just started doing this weird clockwork.
Oh,
like
the joke
this,
about,
and he said,
yeah.
and that's Toscanini.
And he's making
because
fun.
he felt Toscanini was too metronomic. I mean, the guy had no idea what the hell he was talking about. It happens to be. You know, one of the things about Ives is a neighbor of his said it's hard to quote Ives because what he said was not what he meant. And you have to understand what he's talking
because
about.
he's being witty and he's
Yeah.
exaggerating.
And it may come out of
And
nowhere.
Emerson liked to exaggerate. He admitted that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
And
very
also,
Ivesian,
as
too.
Emerson said, do I contradict myself? Well, very well then, I contradict myself. This
Yeah.
was Ives also.
And John Kirkpatrick once said to me, asking about something that didn't jive, I thought, and John said, he was very paradoxical. and that stuck with me, how dramatically J.K. put that.
Well, J.K. told another story that he said to Ives about notation. Ives's notation was very individual and often made things a lot harder to read. He'd spell notes in a peculiar way because he believed that
E sharp.
an A flat or a G sharp on the piano, even though they're the same key, were actually different notes.
Yeah.
Things like that.
And the quartets, it makes a difference because you can play a G sharp higher than the A flat.
Yes. But anyway, Kirkpatrick said at some point about notation or something for the sake of simplicity, and suddenly Ives blew up in his face.
Yeah,
And he went
that
on
was
a
a song,
tirade.
and it was a falling interval where it was really just a fourth B flat to an F, and the bottom note was an E sharp. And John knew as an editor it would be a lot better if it was an
Yeah.
F. Ives had a breakdown
Total
over it,
fit,
and
and he-
flopped undoubtedly
Well,
right on this.
He ended up at
sofa.
the peak with yelling, "God damn simplicity!"
Yeah,
and then
God damn
collapsed. Well, I think what I think about that actually, A, he was objecting to John trying to change his spelling of notes. B, I think he was responding because again, Ives knew a whole lot more about the musical world around him than people realized. He knew he read Modern Music, the main magazine of
Yeah.
religiously every time it came out. He kept newspaper clippings of composers and performances. I think his music had been criticized when the new Americana school, like people like Copland and Virgil Thompson, had a new kind of simplicity. I think Ives was being criticized for not conforming to the new ideal of simplicity as the American ideal. And I think that's part of what set him off in
Yeah,
that tirade.
yeah,
But
there
again,
was
you
a
have to know
currency
how
to
he
the
talks,
issue.
what he's thinking about
Yeah.
when he's saying these things that just seem inexplicable at the time.
Yeah. I'd love to play one of these cornets sometime. Oh, there's a mute up there. That's really something I would like to test. Because I don't think that Ives's use of mute is understood. That we use a modern metal mute that's built to buzz, and I think a mute in those days was truly a darker muting of the sound. Well, at any rate, there's all that. I love the ball field sign,
There's a
which
ball
comes from
field.
Yale.
There's a deer horn right
Deer
there.
horn up there, right?
There are some bitters bottles.
I love
that they
the
found.
collection of bitters. The amazing thing happened. I was like an old fashioned, which is bourbon and bitters and sugar and cherry or something. And when Prohibition was passed, but not in effect yet, Ives panicked. He wanted to get as much bitters as he could. He ordered Oh, I don't know because we have so much. It must have been 4, 5, 6 cases of bitters bottles from Hamburg, and that was the one element you think back. That's the one element that you had to get before Prohibition, because you could get hooch, you could make your drinks. But we end up here with, there are 6 bottles of bitters right
Well, you
here.
gave me one of those bottles.
I have
in my
one,
kitchen.
you've got one. The basement had 2 cases. Even when Charlie Tyler and I were talking over moving everything out of the house in 2012, it was a question, what do you do with cases of bitters from 1919? So this place represents that little bit of history.
Yeah.
And these letters boxes are now empty because Yale would have the letters actually together. And I love this picture of Charlie is how old there? 5?
Something like that.
And his brother 3. And his brother looks like a girl.
Because they dressed little boys as girls.
Yeah, with the curls
those
and all.
days in a dress.
And it's a beautiful picture of Charlie, though. You see such a sweetness, like a caring person in that young kid. And that's what it became.
But in early pictures of Ives, you see there's this ferocious intelligence in the eyes.
Yeah.
It's not like you look at him and you say there's a genius exactly. You look at him and you say there's a person, there's a real...
Deep human.
There is a human being.
Which his nephews knew and loved him for it. And somewhere here, it's out in the display, I think, is the famous Eugene Smith photo of Charlie when nothing was going right and he just said, lean forward. And Charlie leaned forward, and the greatest picture of Ives ever.
Well, Ives had been cutting up. He had been making
he always
faces
did.
and sticking out his tongue. He said it was like a child.
Yeah.
And then he said, lean forward. And Ives clearly said, okay, I'm going to really do it. And he said he held it for several seconds. I mean, he posed.
That's a beautiful picture.
It's a beautiful picture.
And we have that one really handsome color picture of him. It's just outside of this space at this display at the American Academy. And that, too, is just extraordinarily handsome without any self-regard or interest. It's just a thoughtful human. You can just see depth in that picture. I just love it.
And that picture of Ives on the Bernstein original Second Symphony recording out there is what immediately attracted me to Ives. And he's sitting there and he's wearing that hat. And I just said, that's an interesting face.
I was taken
really
on the
like
porch
that face.
at West Reading, just outside. Same one where later you see pictures of Charlie with cowls lounging on the bench.
Charlie did not do publicity, and Harmony really actually didn't like any of the publicity. She didn't like people getting involved in their lives.
They were very private lives.
They were very private. Ives, I think, was divided about that. He
wanted his music to be known.
He wanted his music to
be known.
And in some ways, he understood what came with that, which is you have to get personally involved and you have to let people take your picture. But he was never really totally reconciled to that. So he did it sometimes, and other times he'd cut up.
Seemed to cut up all the time. There's pictures that Clara Zipperl was trying to take at the side of the house. They have the one where he makes the bizarre faces, and there's a beautiful one. It's on the cover of some books where the two of them are. She's seen over his shoulder. That's touching.
Every time you see a photo of the two of them, they're almost physically they're physically touching almost all the time. They're just sort of shoved together.
Now he had taken her to the junior prom at Yale because David obviously set them up, brother David Twitchell. And then no sparks.
Right.
And then it was 1905 up at Saranac Lake that David once again gets Charlie up there and Harmony's there. And he starts writing the 3-page sonata. That's a breakthrough piece compared to anything going on with the violin sonatas in that same era.
And there's the big question of did Harmony understand, whatever that means, his music? My feeling is that she looked at his music as him, just him. So she loved him, and so she loved his music.
Yes, right. We don't ever hear her taking sides about good and bad. He doesn't reference her. He asks Moss White or Edie or others, what do you think, of a piece? And he writes down a little memo of their feedback. The two of them didn't agree. That's weird. And harmony is never referenced as I asked harmony, he doesn't do that.
Yeah.
And yet she is so involved in supporting the breadth of literature that he reads and probably helping him find poems, probably suggesting them, I would think, because she read to him all the time when his eyes got weak, of course.
Yeah. Here's something that was interesting, I think. I think there's a letter of hers. It may have been me who made well-known Ives' statement, music, quote, music is life, unquote.
Oh, yeah.
Where that comes from is a letter of harmony where she quotes him and she said, you say music is life. Mm-hmm. And she quotes that in order to sort of disagree with him. And she goes on to say what her idea of music and life is.
Yeah.
So Harmony was very much her own person. She was president of the Mark Twain Society. She had her own life. She did a lot of church work. So I think we're getting toward the end of our tour.
Yeah. This is what happens when you're in this room.
Yeah.
You just end up so much stimulus and so many things to admire and be amazed.
So many memories.
Like he's still here.
Yeah, exactly. The first time I played this piano when I first visited this, I heard Charlie yelling at me, "Stop being such a sissy, play the thing."
Talking to you, huh? Oh, me.
Okay.
This is a fantastic experience to be in this room and to be together with you here.
And to be with you, yeah.